my van today because everybody's home and there's not a single quiet place to film in our apartment right now. So Jeremy is with the kids and we're gonna see if I can just get a little alone time, film this video in our van. Which is a gorgeous day today and I am wearing my Birkenstocks for the first time this summer. Pretty exciting. Hi, welcome back. My name is Mary Beth. If you are new to this channel, welcome here. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about home birth and what it's like to have your baby at home. So I've heard and read recently that home birth is something that more people are looking into, given just the general instability of hospitals right now, the unique situation that we're in. So because I've had 2 home births, I thought that I would share a bit about my experience, sort of give my 2 cents. I'm going to talk a bit about my birth stories and then answer the most popular questions that either I've been asked personally about home birth or that I asked myself when I was looking into it. So hopefully this will be helpful for you if you're considering having a home birth right now. I will also post a link below. It's called ontariomidwives.ca/home-birth-FAQ. So that's a website that has been very helpful for me. And if you live in Ontario, you can find a lot more information on that website. Also, a quick disclaimer, I have had a positive experience with home births. However, I'm not even necessarily an advocate for home births. I think that every woman should be able to have her baby wherever she and her support group and her family feel the most comfortable. I also just want to say that I am very grateful that we do have hospitals available, especially if I would have had any complications that would arise during birth. Knowing that that is an option is something that some women around the world do not have, and I don't want to ever take that for granted. So the reason I ended up looking into having home births in the first place is basically just a cliche. My mom did it, so I wanted to do it. I was present for part of one of my siblings' births at one point, and so I just kind of knew what that looked like, and so that was kind of just sort of my default. I was probably going to have a home birth. Also, I'd never really spent much time in hospitals. I just didn't even really know what that would look like. So right away when we were pregnant with our first, I decided to look into midwives, and I basically just Googled midwives in our city and came up with a couple of different midwifery clinics. And then what I did was I called all three. I called all 3 of them, and I was put on a waiting list for all of them, which was kind of nerve-wracking in the beginning because I was like, oh my goodness, what if I don't get in? However, they called me back very soon and they brought me in just for sort of initial chat. I guess you could say interview, but it's not really like you're not really applying for anything. It's more just to see if you guys connect and if you think this would be a good situation. So I went in and picked one of them right away, and then I just told the others that I wasn't going to be coming for their interviews. After that, all my appointments were at that midwifery clinic. And the way it works is that there are 2 midwives that work on pairs, at least where I went. And one would do 2 weeks of clinic shifts, and then the other one would be on call for births. So you kind of get to know both of them, which was really nice. Then when I went into labor with my daughter, I called the midwives. I think my water broke around 5 a.m. in the morning. We called the midwife and she sort of coached us over the phone. And then I think they showed up around 8 in the morning. Now, at the time, we lived in a house where we shared everything in the house and we only had 1 bedroom. So the plan was to go to a birth center. So my midwives have 3 options. You could have a home birth, or you could have a hospital birth where they would have privileges, and then they could have a birth. You could have a birth at a birth center. So the birth center is basically just like a spa for giving birth. So I think they had several rooms set up where they have big showers, big tubs, big areas for family members to be in, lounge areas, little kitchen areas. They basically have everything you could want for giving birth. It's just not a hospital. It was a really good option for us because we didn't know if that was really fair for everyone else in our house to try to give birth at home. So we had decided to have the birth at the birth center. So when the midwife showed up at 8 o'clock, they were talking to Jeremy, and I think at this point I was already pretty much having contractions very consistently, and I wasn't really thinking much beyond that. So they were like, okay, if we're gonna go, we gotta go now. And Jeremy talked to me and he was like, do you still want to do this? Do you want to go to the birth center? And I was like, I am not going anywhere. I don't know how people get in cars when they're this far along in labor. So the midwife was great. She was like, okay, well, we can have the baby here, not a problem at all. just go boil some water. And she went to her vehicle and got out a giant hockey bag with all her stuff and basically just went through with it. So we had a couple other people. We had my mom and my sister there, and then we had the midwife, the backup midwife. So they always call another midwife once you are in active labor, and then the student midwife. So we had all of those people at the birth, and I think I labored until about 10 a.m. and then I started pushing. It was pushing for a while until 1 o'clock p.m. she was born. So it was a fairly easy birth. There were no complications. She was born healthy, and I did require stitches afterwards, but it wasn't that extensive, so the midwives were able to do it there. I think they were even optional, but it was recommended for sure. So the midwives did that, and then they cleaned everything up. They showed me how to have a proper latch with breastfeeding for the baby, and then they left, and that was it. So with baby number 2, we ended up getting the same midwives, which was great. We moved halfway through the pregnancy, but fortunately we were just close enough that we were still in what's called their catchment zone, so an area where they are able to travel to quickly enough if you are in labor. So we were able to actually have the exact same midwife too. So the same team of midwives, and then the same midwife ended up being at that birth. So that was great, because that was actually the midwife that I was most comfortable with. And so I was so happy about that. So with my son, I went into labor at 3 a.m. and the midwives got there, I think it was between 5 and 6. And then he ended up being born, I believe it was 8 a.m. in the morning. So his labor was quicker. He ended up being 10 pounds, 3 ounces, which when I heard that, I was so shocked that I was able to give birth to a baby that big. But to be honest, I couldn't really say that I really felt a difference in size, really. I mean, in the moment, it's just all kind of a blur. So that was great. However, because he was so big, we ended up having to go to the hospital because they wanted to make sure that I had not had undiagnosed gestational diabetes during the pregnancy, which may have accounted for the weight. So because of the weight gain, we had to go to the hospital in order to make sure that his blood sugars were stable. So we went and had our own room, which was great. And we just stayed there for the rest of the day and slept most of the time. And the nurses just took his blood. I think it was every 2 hours, and he ended up being fine. So we went home that night. So yeah, so that is just like our birth stories in a nutshell. And now I want to talk about the most popular questions that I've been asked about home birth. So number 1 is it safe? So I would say, and this is a quote from the midwifery website of the clinic that I would use, there are distinct risks and benefits to every birthplace. And I think that pretty much just sums it up. I mean, obviously, if you're at home, you don't have direct access to things that you would have at a hospital. However, I've also heard birth stories at hospitals where moms have been pressured to go faster than maybe their bodies were ready for, or take drugs for something they weren't prepared for, or things can happen either way, anywhere you have a baby. So for me, I felt very safe at home. The other thing is that the midwives, when they come to your home, they do schedule out an emergency plan. So you talk about, okay, if anything comes up, this is what we're going to do. So they have privileges at a hospital close to you, and they will let you know that which hospital that will be, and sort of just plan out what would happen in a scenario like that. You will also not be allowed to have your baby at home, at least where I live, if your pregnancy is deemed high risk at all. So that would be like multiples, or a breech baby, or a preterm labor, or you've gone too far past your due date. So there are multiple things that they can find out during the pregnancy that they will say, okay, it is not safe for you to have a home birth. We need to be at a hospital, and then they will tell you that beforehand. Question number 2 is, what about the mess? Which, totally fair. Ooh, it's windy. My window's only open a tiny bit. There's so much wind, and it feels so good. So this question I got asked a lot, and it's a pretty fair question. I mean, you don't really want to think about having all of that stuff to take care of at your own home right after you've given birth. And probably the people who've been with you during the birth are also exhausted, so no one wants to have to think about that. However, The midwives do everything. At least my midwives did. They bring large absorbent pads that are disposable that cover your bed and pretty much any other area that you want to cover, wherever you think you might be laboring, your floors, anything. They bring those, and then they take care of it all afterwards. They put all the laundry in a bag for you. I never saw any mess for either of my births. By the time I was out of bed and moving around at all, everything was gone and taken care of. So for me, that was not even an issue at all. They also help you properly dispose of the placenta. Number 3, do you have to go to the hospital afterwards? So with my son, I did, because of how I mentioned the weight was an issue. However, that is usually not the case unless something comes up like that. The midwives come to your home for all the appointments following the birth. So my midwives came day 1, day 3, day 5, and day 10. After that, the remaining appointments were at the midwifery clinic. Number 4, is it free? So in Ontario, yes, it is, and most of the other provinces in Canada. However, there are a few where it is not free. So depending where you live, you will definitely have to look that up. Number 5, what about the pain? This seems to be the most obvious and glaring question as well that I get asked. Why wouldn't you get an epidural? To me, the actual reason is pretty dumb. I realize that. I am just really afraid of needles, and the idea of having that long giant needle stuck in my spine just terrifies me a lot more than giving birth without it. So that is, I know, a kind of ridiculous reason, but pretty much that's the only one. So if you do have a home birth, you cannot get an epidural. There's that. However, midwives do have some pain management techniques, mainly natural methods, so relaxation and massage, breathing techniques, hydrotherapy, which is basically a fancy way of saying they help you take a bath or a shower. Depending on your midwives, they may have access to a few other methods as well, such as what's known as laughing gas. My midwives did not have this available. It would have been available at the birth center, so I'm told. And I was just intrigued by that. That was like the one thing when I was in labor with my daughter, being like, but I was really wanting the laughing gas. So there are a few methods like that your midwives may or may not have access to. Number 6, which I realized I just covered already, was what about an epidural? So yeah, the main reason is just because I'm afraid of needles. That's pretty much it. So number 7 is my home big enough or suitable for childbirth? You basically just need enough space for you to be able to lie down comfortably and for midwives to be able to be around you with their equipment. Other than that, there's really nothing else that you really need. You can have a very small home and it would still be totally fine. Also, they do a home visit before you give birth, just to make sure that they are aware of how to get to your place, practical things like what your buzzer number is if you live in an apartment building, where they're going to park. And then this is also when they talk about how medical personnel will have access to your home if emergency comes up, and they also just look around and make sure everything's safe for giving birth. So if there's some reason why it's not suitable, then they can help you with that at that point. Number 8 is what supplies do I need to buy? So this was something I was like initially, okay, well, I would do want a home birth, but am I going to have to buy tons of stuff in order to make that happen? No, they have everything. So like I said, in my first birth, we weren't even planning on having a home birth, so we had nothing prepared. We had a hospital bag. And I will say the hospital bag or whatever you would have in it, you would still want to have around. So you still want to have like baby diapers, a baby outfit, receiving blankets, things like that, slippers and a house coat for yourself, possibly snacks, the same stuff you would be wanting to bring to the hospital, you'd want to have. Other than that, they bring everything. So the pads, adult diapers, which are so convenient and nice to have around for the first few days. They have everything, so you don't have to worry about that. Number 9 is, can you have whoever you want at the birth? Yes. So as long as you tell the midwives who you want to have there, and as long as they're not being a distraction for you or causing any issues for you while you're giving birth, it's not an issue. And the last one is number 10. Do you know who will be delivering your baby? My midwives worked in pairs, and so I knew it would be one of them. I didn't know which one for sure. I did know the student midwife. She was definitely going to be there. And then fortunately for me, the same one was there at both births. first, and like I said, she was the one that I actually connected with more, and so I was very grateful for that. So that's my story, and those are my answers according to the experiences that I have had. And I love hearing birth stories, so if you have one or you're considering having a birth, leave me a comment, tell me what your plans are, tell me if you would do things differently, if you're considering a home birth, what is something that you're worried about. Any comments that you have, I would love to hear from you. And lastly, I just want to say a quick message. If you are being forced to consider childbirth right now, given everything that's going on at hospitals, and you just aren't able to have who you would wish you could have around you, or if everything's just sort of up in the air with your birth plan right now, I just hope that this has been encouraging you for in some way. And I'm so sorry that that is the case for you. And I really hope that in the end, you and your baby will be healthy and happy, and that this will all be over soon. And then all you have to think about is your brand new baby, and everything that you went through will just sort of blur and you won't remember it, which is how it works for me. So thank you for watching this video, and don't forget, if you want to see more of what I post, you can subscribe by clicking on my face. Also, the subscribe button works as well. And thank you for watching.